Ukraine is in a state of disarray, and its president, Volodymyr Zelensky, has just weathered perhaps the toughest week of his tenure. Why, you ask? Well, in a nutshell, Zelensky is fighting an uphill battle, a battle to keep the West's support for the war-ravaged Ukraine. And what's causing this? Well, it's a complex mix of factors at play. From his top general conceding a war stalemate to Gaza war, keeping Ukraine's closest allies preoccupied, and add to that Western media reports quoting close aides describing Zelensky as delusional. The Ukrainian president's headaches are multiplying, and Ukraine's war goals are beginning to seem increasingly out of reach. Let's delve into why. Last week, we told you that the situation on the ground in Ukraine has taken a grim turn. Its eastern front lines are ablaze with fierce battles as Russian forces continue their advances. And after that, Ukraine's top commander, General Zelensky, openly admitted that the war has hit a stalemate. And this was a significant statement, of course, given his authority. Even worse for Zelensky, these words are eroding Ukraine's wartime morale. Remember, Ukraine's much-anticipated counteroffensive fell short of the expectations. Their original goal was to reclaim Crimea, which was annexed by Russia in 2014. Yet, 4 months after launching that highly publicized campaign and armed with state-of-the-art Western military equipment, that goal remains unattained. And instead, Ukraine finds itself still asking for more weapons, more aid, more international attention, even while its men and women continue to bear the brunt of the Russian onslaught. And as the clock ticks, Ukraine is supposed to hold its presidential elections next year. According to Ukraine's constitution, by the way, the next presidential polls are scheduled for 2024. However, the current president, Zelensky, deems discussions about the elections while the country is fighting Russia as irresponsible. That's right. In a video address on Monday, Zelensky emphasized that Ukraine must maintain its concentration on the pressing military challenges and prioritize unity over political wrangling. Listen in.
We must decide that now is the time of defense, the time of battle, on which the fate of the state and people depends, and not the farce that only Russia expects from Ukraine. I believe that now is not the right time for elections.
Now remember, Ukraine is currently under martial law as it battles to expel Russian forces from its territory. But as the war drags on, Zelensky has been contemplating whether to invoke a special provision to hold elections. According to the Ukrainian Foreign Minister, Dmytro Kuleba, Zelensky has been weighing the pros and the cons of holding elections, while large parts of his country are still affected by the ongoing warfare, and while Ukraine strives to maintain the support of its allies. Some U.S. Republican senators argue that the Ukraine elections should proceed as planned to demonstrate commitment to democracy. But let's just turn our focus back to the war stalemate. Even though Zelensky attempts to downplay the reality on the battleground, reports saying that the US and European officials have quietly started pushing Zelensky towards peace negotiations amid the two ongoing global conflicts. Israel versus Hamas, Russia versus Ukraine. The West has initiated secret talks with the Ukrainian government about what potential peace negotiations with Russia might entail. And this begs the big question. What would these peace negotiations actually look like? That is indeed a good question, because after nearly 2 years of the war and with Russia holding control over substantial portions of the Ukrainian territory, the Western perspective of what Ukraine should do to achieve this begs scrutiny. And reports saying that discussions are touching upon a wide array of issues, indicating that Ukraine may need to make some compromises in order to secure a deal. And ironically, the burden appears to have inadvertently shifted onto the shoulders of the nation that is fighting to defend its land. And reports indicating that sensitive topics were broached last month when representatives from over 50 nations, all supporting Ukraine and including NATO members, formed the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. They, by the way, share similar concerns. Number one, the war has hit a stalemate. Number two, Ukraine is running out of forces. Number three, Russia seemingly possesses an endless supply of forces and weaponry. Now, as mentioned earlier, Zelensky refused to admit the stalemate on the battlefield. And not just that, he also denies claims that Western allies are pressurizing Kiev to negotiate. However, with the war now entering its 20th month, the sense of war fatigue and weariness is palpable. Ukraine's poor performance in the counteroffensive has pushed Zelensky to engage with Western leaders in an effort to combat this fatigue. He knows and he has said that the Israel-Hamas conflict has diverted the global attention away from Ukraine. And this, he says, may align with Russia's ultimate war goals. The scary truth is, he may not be wrong. 30 days of bombing, 30 days of air raids. What's left of Gaza 1 month into this war? Not much. Here are some satellite images. This is what Gaza looked like before the war started, and this is what the enclave looks like right now. Before the war began, Gaza was home to over 2 million people. The enclave is, remember, sandwiched between Israel and the Mediterranean Sea. It is all of 41 kilometers long. The war has split the strip of land into two. There is North Gaza and the South. North is where Gaza City is. North is also where most of the bombing and the fighting has been concentrated. That's not to say that South is safe or has not been affected, because it has. And how? In the last 30 days, we have been showing you visuals of the bombing in Khan Yunis in south, also the Rafah border, Gaza's only crossing not controlled by Israel. Bombs have also hit refugee camps in the south. In fact, since we wrapped our show last night itself, at least 16 people have been killed in Rafah. There have been casualties in Khan Yunis as well. This resident in Khan Yunis saying that there is nothing left in Gaza, and he is waiting for death.
We are tired. We are destroyed. People have been destroyed. Their lives are destroyed. Children are destroyed. Women and children died. All of them died. No one is left in Gaza. Is anyone left in Gaza? No one remains. Thank God we are safe. But I swear we are waiting the death. It will be better than living. We are waiting for death in each moment. It's a suspended death.
This is the queue for water in South Gaza. Thousands lining up here every day to get to a water hose and then fill up their canisters.
This water canister is distributed to at least 4 families. Each canister is 2 to 3 liters. May God help us.
And the situation in the north is worse, by the way. At least a quarter of the buildings in the north have either been destroyed or damaged, at least a quarter. Apart from homes, hospitals, schools, bakeries and other infrastructure also being hit. Among the most affected areas being Jabalia, Gaza's largest refugee camp. It has been bombed multiple times, in fact, and this is what it looks like a month into this war.
نحن الآن في منطقة الست. هذا المكان مكتظ بالسكان.
And this is Beit Hanun in northeastern Gaza.
אבל הניצחון הזה כרוך לא רק במאמץ מלחמתי צבאי.
The question is, what happens to these areas once the war is over? Netanyahu says Israel will assume overall security of Gaza, but what does that even mean? Will boots stay on the ground? Is that what Netanyahu is hinting at? Over 10,000 people have died in Gaza in the last 30 days. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said that Gaza is becoming a graveyard for children.
Gaza is becoming a graveyard for children. Hundreds of girls and boys are reportedly being killed or injured every day. More journalists have reportedly been killed over a 4-week period than in any conflict in at least 3 decades. More United Nations aid workers have been killed than in any comparable period in the history of our organization.
In fact, half of the housing units in Gaza have been at least partially destroyed. Within a month, Gaza has lost 61% of its jobs. 61%. That is according to the United Nations Labour Agency. The UN body has warned that the economic fallout of this war will be felt for, quote-unquote, many years to come. The job loss does not end at Gaza, by the way. The ILO estimating that West Bank also has lost 24% of its employment in a month. This is equal to some 208,000 jobs. The ILO saying, when combined, the job losses in Gaza and the West Bank amounting to a daily income loss of about $16 million. In Gaza, over 80% of the population already lives below the poverty line. What happens to them now? Did you notice something? The Israeli Prime Minister was wearing a white shirt today. Do you think there is symbolism there? What do you think the color white actually signifies? Let me give you a hint. This video released by the Israeli Defense Forces shows the Palestinians waving white flags as they head south from Gaza City. You can see white has many meanings. At a Western wedding, white signifies purity, innocence. In India, white often becomes a color of grief. You will see people wearing white at funerals. During wartime, white becomes a color of truce or surrender. Now, Netanyahu is not surrendering. Far from that. He knows the war is going to be a long-drawn one. Israel, in fact, has said this repeatedly. But what Netanyahu has announced today is the possibility of a brief halt in the bombing. Like you heard, Netanyahu clearly said the halts should not be mistaken for ceasefire, but Israel will nonetheless be open to considering brief pauses in the firing, temporary truce, in other words. Netanyahu's white shirt is symbolic of this spirit. It's not like Netanyahu has not donned white all of this month. Of course he did, especially when meeting the foreign dignitaries, for instance. He wore white when meeting the Bulgarian Prime Minister or the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. But for the most part, in the last 30 days, we have seen Netanyahu wearing black. Black, again, is the color of grief in Israel. And a leader's choice of clothing during such times is not a mere coincidence. Colors are carefully picked to say what the leaders may not be able to. Take the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, for example. Ever since the war broke out in Ukraine, we have seen Zelensky in olive green t-shirts. Sometimes he wears browns. And these are colors, remember, associated with the armed forces. And these t-shirts are Zelensky's way of reminding the world that his country is at war, and also extending his solidarity with the armed forces at home, because there are only so many times you can say these things in words. And that is where wartime leaders use wardrobe diplomacy.